Okay, guys. So the first thing we are going to talk about in our CIA system is the C, which is your company. Now, getting the right company set up is very important for two main reasons. And that is for protection of your personal assets, so that your personal assets aren't taken for business responsibilities. And then also because it can save you thousands, if not millions over your lifetime of dollars in taxes. And I know all of us want to save money in taxes. So let me explain to you how this works with the different types of companies you can set up. Now, there are five main types of companies. So there's a sole proprietorship, and that's a company, it's not incorporated, it only has one owner. The owner pays all the income tax on his profits, and a sole proprietorship can have a different name than the owner. It can have its own EIN number, which is the taxpayer identification number. But the income is all reported as income on the owner's tax return. That's a sole proprietorship. A partnership is exactly the same as a sole proprietorship, except you have two or three or a group of people that come together and share ownership and resources. They don't, just like the sole proprietorship, though, they don't file anything with the Secretary of State or the IRS to let anyone know that they're in business. They just get together and start being a business. Then there is the C Corp. Now, the C Corp is a regular corporation. It's the Starbucks, the Apple, the Google. And for most of you starting out, this is probably not your best setup. You'd want to start a C Corp if you had like over 100 investors or something like that. And of course, to set this up, you do have to file some paperwork with your Secretary of State and the IRS. And there's lots of reporting requirements for C Corps. Then there is the LLC. And this is one you're probably most familiar with. And if you're already set up, you probably are set up as an LLC. So as with the corporation, an LLC, you file with an LLC, you file a form with your Secretary of State's office, letting them know, hey, we're in business as an LLC. And you also obtain a taxpayer identification number called the EIN, which we explain how to get one of those later in the Street Legal Guide. So that's the fourth type. And then the fifth type of company is called an S Corp. But this is tricky, guys, because an S Corp is just a type of LLC. It allows you to be taxed different than a regular LLC, which I will explain in just a minute, but it's just an LLC. So let's go a little bit deeper and find out which one of these is better if you want to protect your personal assets. And what do I mean by that? So if you're operating as a sole proprietorship or a partnership and something goes wrong in your business, you personally have to pay for it. So here's a real life example, and I've changed the names to protect the innocent or the guilty. Irene was a stay-at-home mom, but her friends noticed that she was a great interior designer. And so they started just asking her for some help with their homes. And she developed a really good reputation in her area. But she just helped people on and off as she had time. So one day in church, she ran into somebody who was a criminal defense attorney. And she asked him whether he thought she should set up an LLC rather than just being a sole proprietorship. But he said he didn't think so because she just did it on and off and it didn't really matter. This was a criminal defense attorney. Now, keep in mind, guys, criminal defense attorneys are not corporate lawyers. So sometimes they don't have the right knowledge to help advise you in the area that you need. So what happens with Irene? Well, one day, Irene was hired by a friend, Susan, to help do some design work in her home. And while Irene was at Susan's house, guys, she knocked over a vase that was super unique, and it just happened to be worth $100,000. And of course, Susan demanded that Irene pay for it, even though, of course, it was a complete accident. Well, then Irene talked to another attorney to see what she could do, if anything. And this new attorney said that it would actually cost her more to go to court. And besides, even if she did go to court, Irene probably would lose because she actually did knock over the vase. And so she would probably end up having to pay for it anyways, in addition to attorney's fees and court fees. So Irene didn't have a choice. She had to pay for the vase. But the problem is she didn't have $100,000 lying around. So she had to take a second mortgage on her home, and she had to use part of her retirement savings to replace Susan's vase. So do you see in this case, Irene's personal assets, her home, her retirement account, she could have sold a car, she could have drained her savings account. Those personal assets had to pay for the debt of her business. When she was at Susan's house, she was operating in her business capacity. The business, if she had been set up right, would have protected her from having to use personal assets to satisfy the debt of the business. I hope that makes sense. Now, there are two types of businesses that do not protect your personal assets: a sole proprietorship and a partnership. So if you own a house or a car, a retirement account, a savings account, a Rolex watch, artwork, whatever, you will really want to think about whether either of these two types of setups are the right ones for you. They're very easy. There's no reporting requirements to your Secretary of State or anything like that. But if you have assets personally and you want to protect them, a sole proprietorship or a partnership probably isn't the right setup. Well, let's see what happens. Let's use the same example with Irene. And Irene has an LLC or a corporation set up for her design business. Let's say she has an LLC set up. So in this case, Irene, if she had an LLC set up or a corporation, she would have received what's called this amazing thing. It's called the corporate shield. That shield would require only Irene to only pay Susan back with the assets of her business and not her personal assets, even if the LLC had no assets. In that case, Irene would not have had to take a second out on her home. She wouldn't have to sell her car. She wouldn't have to drain her retirement account. Susan could only get the assets of the business to pay for the vase. I hope you're seeing how important this personal asset protection is. So under the law, an LLC and a corporation are actually considered to be a separate person. So this separate person is responsible for their own debts and liabilities, even if it's run by you. Does that make sense? An LLC and a corporation give you that corporate shield that you want to protect your personal assets from the debts and liabilities of your company. Only the business has to pay for the business, and you get to keep your house. So having a corporation or an LLC set up, guys, would do just what the CIA says. It would stop the threat of having your stuff taken before it even happens. Now, of course, that's personal asset protection, but a company, the right kind of company, also helps you save money in taxes, which we are going to talk about in the next video.